An na chéadíag agus seachgad chaidh Prògraman foghlaim a chraoladh mar fáist gan an tré around Scotland. A bheith gamas iad sealladh hort iad gronta Eilean an Inse gaul, I gíse déhhacho fír hóiride múgach Eilean, agus dúirt dealadh iad cuidganna characterin a bheas na tífar choirsnach gos adda a bhórlóg a hort chuna Eilean Leòdhais, Uist agus an Eilean Sgitheanach. Bheas a togáil iad imimlach gan an Eilean agus na dúlainn a bheith dul an chosio, ach cuideach bheas a dúirt súil iad na gníomhachas a bheith cymal beáhaint dí na Eileanaí. An scach Eilean fa seach bheas a cúntaí obrichin úre a gog áte gnúichin tradiisianta, mar croiteach agus iascach. Bena bheith fanéir gan an nnéin dhís na bhrínead, obrichin a chumach cosnach dí ágrí na scídan agus na daine ága iad fallaf go tír mór, os an foghlaim agus cosnach a hálaige dheis go Eilean in áraigh. Aniu ha 8,000 neacha fidach as na Eilean an siar guléir, ach nu a chaine Prògraman television a dhéanú ag toiseach na seachgadin bheit 2,000 duine a bharach a fidach ionta. Go héintseach ha adamh slói Eilean a cheo aniu ag iad na sardan a bheit nóirsan le córas 9,000 a fidachan in hácarí began agus 6,000 ag an naun. Channeal checkú nach el aharachagad tínad saocha na Eilean, agus seoach choram na 3 Prògraman écin, around Scotland, Hebrides.
Dunvegan Castle, Isle of Skye, home to the chiefs of the clan MacLeod for the past 700 years. Today, still the home of Dame Flora MacLeod, the 28th chief. You find this blend of ancient tradition and the present day everywhere you go in the Hebrides. To outsiders, Skye often means mystery and romance. But today it's the most visited of all the Hebrides. Only a narrow strip of water separates it from the mainland. In summer, car ferries shuttle between the mainland and Eilean. It's the only Hebridean ferry that operates on Sunday, by the way. Many visitors come by car, because there aren't many buses on the islands. Now a new jetty has been built for larger ferries because the flow of tourists and cars to Skye is growing all the time. There's even talk about building a bridge to link the island with the mainland forever. In summer, every ferry disgorges another load of visitors to Skye, many of them from overseas. Among the arrivals we saw were Margaret Mitchell and Gail Letts from Australia. No luck this time, but we'll meet up again. On a brief visit to Skye, visitors often miss the fact that crofting is still the island's basic industry. It's mostly in the form of rough hill grazings. Conditions here are best suited to stock rearing, and most crofters rear sheep or cattle for sale on the mainland. Jonathan MacDonald is a crofter at Kilmuir in the north of Skye, and he told us about his own craft.
Like the majority of crofts in Skye, this is a part-time unit, and we have 12 acres of arable ground and a share in the common grazings. We are able to carry 4 cows and followers and about 30 sheep. Skye has 2,000 crofts altogether, and of these only 73 are full-time crofts. All the rest are small crofts, and the crofter is very often to go out and seek some other employment. He may be employed in several ways, perhaps by fishing or by having a shop or by being a postman or something like this. He has to have some other sideline or subsidiary employment.
Jonathan himself was quick to see another opportunity in Skye, the growing tourist trade. In recent years, he's built up a thriving crafts business, though he still carries on his croft too.
It'll be that one.
No, I think,
Some of the goods in the shop are manufactured elsewhere, but many of them are made by Jonathan himself.
I have taken a keen interest in crafts all my life, and we started off doing basketry. From there we went on to horncraft and to weaving and now to pottery and stone polishing. All this ties in very well indeed with the market of Skye, with the tourist market, which is with us now in quite a big way. I have been fortunate, I say, in having been able to stay in Skye and to develop my own livelihood here.
But not everyone can stay in Skye and earn a livelihood there. Like most parts of the Highlands and Islands, Skye suffers a constant loss of people going to the mainland to find work. That's why the new tourist boom is so important to islanders like Jonathan. Jonathan makes good use of small stones, which he collects from the local beaches.
I use 2 methods. First of all, the cutting, which I do by diamond saw, and then polishing by stone, carborundum stone, buff, and so on. This is a very good method. You are able to shape your stones, select the ones you like, and use them for any specific purpose and to any design you wish. The second method is by using the tumbler, and this is a very simple method. Anyone at all can do this sort of work by using a tumbler, which is all that is needed is just a barrel and this motor and machine to turn the barrel round. We use several sizes of stone in the tumbler and make various things from the stones we polish by this method.
We asked Jonathan how his crafts business all began.
This started in a very small way indeed. In fact, I started when I was still at school making small models of the thatched croft cottage of Skye. These sold well, sold them on wholesale basis first of all, and then went on to retail them with the baskets that my father and I produced. Still, at this stage, after 20 years or so, we in the family still make the small models of the croft cottage and sell them very, very well. But we developed this onto other crafts, members of the family doing diversity of crafts and I myself going on from one to another. And now our latest development here is a pottery. And I am very thrilled with the pottery and thrilled that I'm able to make pottery.
Starting with his interest in craft work, Jonathan has gradually built up a tourist business which now includes a tea room also. But it's still really a family business because it's managed by one of his sisters. To complete the picture, he now runs the Duntalm Hotel as well. The important thing about Jonathan MacDonald is that largely by his own effort, he's built a thriving business and so managed to continue to live in Skye.
It is quite encouraging, of course, in the last year or two to see a few of the young people in this particular area and in some of the other areas as well, setting out on their own, getting fishing boats and going into the fishing. Some also have been able to set out in crofting and are successfully doing this. And to find that there are others who would very much like to be able to have something to start off with and to secure a livelihood for them. I think there is a very good chance that more could be done in tourism, in fishing, and indeed in crofting by intensifying where the crofts are sufficiently large to allow this.
But meanwhile, back to Margaret and Gail on the road.
Wait for me. Yep. Are you going to Ergol?
Just about, yes.
Oh, fine. Can we have a ride?
Sure.
All right.
We both come from Perth in Western Australia. I left last November and I've been touring around the continent mainly ever since, and I'm going back in about a month's time. Margaret has just arrived. We met up in London 2 weeks ago, and she's just starting. We had nothing to do, so we decided to come to Scotland and see Perth in Scotland.
Scotland's so green at home. In the winter even, it's barely as green as Scotland is in the summer.
Another difference would be the character of the hillside itself. Australia is one of the flattest countries in the world, and I think you notice it when you come here and find firstly hillsides with green trees all over them, and then in Skye, the hillsides with all the rocks on them, very jagged and rugged.
School children in Skye are helping to beautify the island these days. Pupils from Dunvegan School have planted trees as part of their effort in a competition called Highland Village 1970. The idea is for schools in the Highlands and Islands to help improve the appearance of their own crofting village. Each pupil has donated a tree or shrub, and a label gives the donor's name and the date of planting. Another idea by Dunvegan, improving a path that leads to an old churchyard people like to visit. As well as planting trees, boys from Dunvegan School have put up fencing and built a stile. In future years, they'll be able to point out their own part in making Skye even more attractive. Margaret and Gail again. They're making for the Coolins, known to climbers all over Europe. But before we left Dunvegan, there was one place we had to visit, Dunvegan Castle itself.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Dunvegan up until early 1800 was only accessible by sea. We are now going to leave the main entrance and proceed into the 16th century part of the castle.
When we arrived, Mr. Heron, the guide, was just about to conduct a party of visitors round. But there's no pleasing some folk. The party had 2 deserters aboard. Needless to say, this is very strictly illegal. But luckily, what you're seeing didn't really happen at all. Or rather, it only happened because of the magic for which Dunvegan is famous.
Look at that. Oh, it's nice. Yes. What's this leader for? Who is it? Who is it? What's I don't know. She looks too ancient. Come on. I'm coming. I wonder how old it is.
You'd like to know how old it is. It's so old that nobody really knows quite for certain sure about it. It's been in the castle for hundreds and hundreds of years, ever since there was a castle and ever since there was a chief. And so our forefathers decided it must be been a fairy gift. And the fairies gave it with a wonderful promise that it should always bring victory to the clan when it was in danger. But now we know something a little more about the flag. We know that this silk, and you can see it's threadbare, you can look through and think it's a spider's web, that it came from the East, and that it was something precious in the East because it's beautifully darned. And so they say it must have been a very, very great treasure in the East, perhaps a saint's shirt. We know it's been waved twice in great battles, and each time the MacLeods won. It hasn't been waved a third time.
But though Dunvegan's a treasure house of interesting things, Jim wasn't satisfied.
Jimmy! Jimmy!
Now beside herself with worry, Catherine searches distractedly. The sea gate. In olden times, the only entrance to the castle. In this narrow passage, the 11th chief of the clan was treacherously murdered by his own uncle. But seldom has it witnessed a sight like this. The dungeon, still with its old chains and shackles. A ghostly place. And the monster still lives. Back to reality, but not an example to follow, needless to say. Margaret and Gail, reduced to walking again. Some people feel that Skye is becoming too much of a tourist island. The tourism destroys the old way of life in village and croft in return for doubtful benefits. But tourism seems the best bet to bring more jobs to the island, so that the islanders themselves can continue to live here. What sticks in your mind about Skye is its unspoiled beauty. And whatever its drawbacks, the tourist trade gives more people than ever before the chance to enjoy its scenery for themselves. Although the Outer Hebrides are cut off from the mainland by several miles of stormy water, they're by no means isolated nowadays. The Uists consist of North Uist, Benbecula and South Uist, separate islands, but they're now joined together by causeways and a bridge. A regular air service connects the Outer Isles with Glasgow and Inverness. It operates every week from Monday to Saturday, and the flight time between Glasgow and Benbecula is just about an hour. For almost 100 years, sea travel to the islands has been dominated by McBrain's shipping line. Apart from carrying passengers and cars, it holds a contract to deliver mail too. The car ferry Hebrides was built by the government and chartered to McBrain's 5 years ago. Far from being out of touch, the people of the Outer Hebrides must be about the most air-minded in Britain. And to encourage this, the government gives islanders cheap fares when travelling to and from the mainland. The sea journey from North Uist to Skye, the nearest point to the mainland, takes about 2 hours. The Hebrides can carry 600 passengers and more than 50 cars and lorries. And car ferries are especially useful here because there's no public transport system and people like to bring their own cars. The nearest approach to public transport, McBrain's mail buses. Even though they're few and far between, they do at least link all 3 islands. But although the Uists are now joined by bridges and causeways, there are many offshore islands where a ferry is still needed. Neil Campbell lives at Leòdhais at the southern end of South Uist. He's been a ferryman there for years now and knows these waters as well as anyone.
Well, I never worked very much at a show in my life, you see. And, either fishing or merchant navy and so forth. I'm a family man, you see, and I want to be home. As you understand, if I followed the merchant navy or anything like that, or fishing, I wouldn't get home very often, especially the merchant navy. You've been away a long, long time sometimes. And you won't have the pleasure of home.
During holidays from school, Donald Campbell often gets the chance to steer his father's boat, sometimes out to Eriskay, sometimes to Barra, and sometimes past old shipwrecks, for these are dangerous waters. Eriskay, the island where bonny Prince Charlie first landed in Scotland. The whole way of life here is still worlds apart from the noise and bustle of the city. On the islands, the church still plays an important part in the life of the people and is one of the main influences keeping Gaelic language and culture alive today. In rural areas, services are usually preached in Gaelic, and this rule is followed by the Reverend James Morrison of Paibal Free Church of Scotland, though in some places, services may be conducted in both languages.
Ever since I came to North Uist, way back in 1936, I preached every time in Gaelic. Never once have I preached an English sermon in North Uist. When visitors, English visitors are present, of course, I have to make the best of it. And what I do is I give them a summary of what I preached that day, just a short summary. At this time, we have a fine couple from Glasgow. They've come here to stay, and they attend church very consistently. The wife is English, and sometimes she sits there for an hour and 40 minutes without understanding one single word of what is preached. This hour we live in is an hour of testing and temptation. And while it would suit me fine to keep to my study and not interest myself in more material things, I don't think that's in order at all. I feel that while there's leadership required in the pulpit, it's required in every avenue of life today. And we should be interested in the well-being of our people from the material as well as the spiritual point of view.
Many islanders, like Mr. Morrison, feel a definite mission to keep traditional Gaelic values alive.
It can be defined in this way. It's easier to sin in English than in Gaelic. The shrewd islander, with his fine Gaelic culture behind him, is not easily deceived. But with a little coverage of English, they try to get modern trends in like that. The earth is douche leishigu, who harsh go donana, then talker suas who heart for borrow, but toma garaf hashaf. Had the geri suas gonyer, series tolton shears. You must get the learn on him true, let triplet, cruise, the ski.
But the future of Gaelic rests with the children. In rural areas, most of them speak both Gaelic and English, but English seems to be growing in strength, partly due to television. Children at Payball School, North Uist, rehearse a sketch in class. Oddly enough, although these islands have been Gaelic-speaking since ancient times, it's only within recent years that Gaelic has been taught as a school subject. And although this sketch is in Gaelic, it's all about a television set. And the influence of television on these children is certainly to strengthen their English, because the vast bulk of programs is in that language. Perhaps television draws people closer together, but it's no help at all to the native language. A pointer to the future, maybe. In many parts of the islands, an aerial is just as familiar today as a peat stack. A few miles away, work was in progress near the township of Sealladh. But this was no ordinary building site. For one thing, the workers were all students from London University, and they were making an archaeological dig. This is the seed machine. It helps to sift out old seeds and other organic matter from the earth that's been excavated. The machine's still on trial, by the way, at Cambridge University. The students are trying to find out more about the past, how people lived, what they ate, what animals they kept, and so on. And these seeds will help to give some of the answers, because they tell which crops were grown here in the past. The director of the excavation is Ian Crawford, and one of his jobs is to plot the shape and position of different buildings as they are uncovered in the ground. Nearby was the finds tent, where all the objects discovered during the excavation were being cleaned and sorted.
Well, each tray represents one day's find in a certain area on the site, and everything that one person finds is put into one of these trays. It's then brought down, cleaned, and dried. Each type of thing, such as pot and bone, is put into a separate bag, given a serial number, which is then entered in a book.
There are 5 separate digs in progress, all within a small area. Each one represents a place where people actually lived at some time in the past. Some of the sites are not much more than 100 years old, but others date back thousands of years. And all of them have to be uncovered with great care, in case valuable finds are damaged. The evidence already gathered seems to show that people have lived in this area over a period of 4,000 or 5,000 years. Important this because written records are lacking for most of this time in the islands, and spoken traditions are often unreliable, but sometimes the evidence tallies.
A particularly interesting find, rather an intriguing one perhaps, which tends to confirm the documentary evidence. We've had reports on the bone evidence that there's been a number of large hunting dogs, something equivalent to the Scottish-Irish deerhound found on the site in late medieval times, and this would seem to confirm the documentary evidence that an important family connected with the lordship of the Isles lived here in the 14th, 15th century. And of course one would expect them to have, as tradition and documentation says, large deer hunting hounds.
But all the Uists are rich in historical remains. Many small islets contain ancient duns or forts, which are reached by means of a causeway. In the causeway were set rocking stones to warn if strangers approached. This dun is said to be the last one that was occupied in North Uist over 300 years ago. The owner is believed to have angered the King of Scotland, who had him shut up in Duntalm Castle in Skye, where he was fed on salt beef till he died of thirst. Like Uist and Skye, the Uists have relied on crofting and fishing for many generations past. Grimsay is especially well known for lobster fishing. Lobsters caught there are put into a large water tank to keep them fresh for eating. They're sold to the continent as well as markets in the south. But more recently, another asset is being recognised: the scenery. For the Uists are among the most picturesque of all the islands. Another industry uses seaweed collected around the seashore. Factories in North and South Uist employ 200 men part-time in collecting it. As so often happens here, the work's carried out mainly by men who spend the rest of their time crofting. This isn't the first industry based on seaweed. About 200 years ago, it was used to produce chemicals for making glass or soap. But this old industry collapsed because of events elsewhere. Nowadays, after it's been cut, the seaweed is wrapped around a rope and so gathered together into one clump or raft, which is then towed by boat to the factory. In the modern seaweed industry, it's called the alginate industry now, the weed is dried inside the factory in huge furnaces until it's black and stiff. Finally, when it's completely dry, it's filled into plastic bags and sent off for processing. It's used to make a chemical that gels or thickens foodstuffs like ices, puddings and jellies. More recently, another new industry has come to North Uist: bulbs. There's usually very little frost in the outer islands, and the combination of mild weather and sandy soil seems to be ideal for growing bulbs, as they do in Holland. Even so, not everybody likes the idea, because some people feel a bulb industry might cause people to neglect their crafts, and incidentally attract tourists in over-large numbers. Still, there's a distinct chance that the bulb scheme will be greatly extended one day by reclaiming Valley Strand from the sea. This would give another area of more than 15,000 acres for bulb growing, and not even the Dutch would despise that. In fact, one way and another, there's no lack of hope in the Uists.
Sometimes I think that love for our beloved islands of the sea and a will to work, with the emphasis on a will to work, would in a little while go a long way to the disappearance altogether of unemployment and depopulation from our vocabulary altogether. That's my profound persuasion.
Let's go for like a rich hack.
The Outer Hebrides, one of the few areas left in Scotland where most children speak two languages, one native to the island, the other foreign. But in this part of Britain, the foreign language is English. The first words most of these children learned to speak were Gaelic. In some places, the peat layer is 15 or 20 feet deep. It's still commonly used as fuel instead of coal, and it's cut by means of an iron. John Patterson has a croft on the island, and with his wife he cuts the peat in early spring or summer for use during the autumn and winter. Like the other crofters, they're allocated a peat bank for their own private use. Unlike Skye, Uist is mainly flat. There are very few trees, and large areas of the island are covered with black moorland, peat bogs and stony ground. But increasingly, once barren moorland is being reclaimed for grazing. It's done by spreading sand and fertilizers on the land, then sowing clover and grass seed on top. The process is called reseeding. The island sheep have been among the first to benefit from reseeding, because already in Uist, thousands of acres of land that used to be sour and infertile have been changed into good grazing land for cattle and sheep, and at no great cost either. In the islands, perhaps the most common type of sheep is the Scottish blackface, a hardy breed that manages to thrive despite the climate and the comparatively sparse grazing. The sheep are usually dipped once a year to kill off ticks and other vermin that destroy the wool. In rural districts, each township often owns a few thousand acres of common grazing land on the moors. All the crofters in the township have the right to graze their animals on it, and it's quite usual for the men of a township to get together to work as a community, often with the women as well, at jobs like sheep dipping or shearing. Sheep have played an important role in the Highlands and Islands during the last 200 years. They helped to bring about the first Highland clearances, because many landowners evicted their crofters from the best land to give the sheep good pasture for grazing. So the introduction of sheep helped to begin the flow of people from the islands to other parts of Britain and overseas. And this flow is still going on today. But in recent times, wool has helped to bring a new prosperity to Uist, and many crofters like John Patterson now spend most of their time not crofting, but weaving.
It has changed quite a lot. In my young days, it was very much a crofter industry. The family wool crop was being washed, dyed, carded, spun, and even tailored in the crofter's home. And only what was surplus to their own requirements sold elsewhere. It has changed quite a lot. It has become more commercialized. In fact, it has become one of the biggest businesses today in the country. Our export record in Harris Tweed is as good as most industries today in Britain. It goes to all parts of the world, the US, the continent. Even one of our best customers today are in Japan.
This spinning wheel is over 100 years old, and Mrs. Patterson showed us how it works. At one time it was laid down that Harris Tweed had to be hand-spun in this way, as well as hand-woven, to qualify for the trademark. But nowadays the spinning is done in one of the island factories. And today the whole range and style of Harris Tweed is constantly changing and developing.
One mill claims to have more than 50,000 patterns of its own. Of course, there are many different kinds of tweeds, lightweights, middleweights, featherweights, heavyweights, and it's also used by industry. Shipping companies, airlines use it for furnishings and for many other things.
This peat stack in front of John Patterson's house is a typical site on the island. But the houses themselves are usually modern, and just like houses anywhere else. The township where he lives, like most on the island, is built near the coastline. And like many Lewismen, John Patterson is quite familiar with the sea.
I've done quite a variety of jobs. I've been a while making Harris Tweeds, some agricultural contracting, out with the tractors, mowing, reaping, thrashing, also as a merchant, selling goods, feeding stuffs, groceries, and again I'm back at weaving. And this is the general pattern all over the Isles, especially in Uist. At the age of 17, I joined the Merchant Navy, and from there went down to London. From there went on the Australian run, and then on to New Zealand, Canada. You know, this is what happens up in the Isles, especially in my young days. Most of the youth had little to do here by way of employment, and that's why you find so many in almost all the seaports of the world. The women folk, most of them too had to leave, either on domestic service, in hospitals. You'll also find them all over the world. But somehow we keep coming back to the Isles, the call of the Isles. Whatever it is, we like to come back. It's so different to being in a city. There, if one leaves the city for a few years, he comes back, he finds everything new, new faces. But in the Isles, it's so different. We come back to the old scenes. They may seem bare to the stranger, but there's something in it that calls us back.
But the appearance of Lewis is changing quite rapidly too. And places like this old corner in Garrenhain are now a rarity on the island. Yet it's not so long ago that this black house, now a museum, would have been a common sight in Lewis. In the old days, the building was shared by the family and their animals. Today, the thatched houses that remain are often used as outbuildings. The town of Stornoway, the capital of Lewis and the largest town in the Hebrides, tends to draw people in from the rural parts of the island. It's a natural harbour, and it used to be a main centre for herring fishing. At one time, more than 1,000 fishing boats operated from Stornoway Harbour, though they didn't all belong to the island. But there was a steady decline over the years, Until about 10 years ago, it was estimated that less than a dozen boats remained. But in 1961, the Highland Development Board decided to help, and it began to lend money to selected fishermen to buy their own vessels. Today, mainly due to this help, the fishing industry is again reviving in Stornoway. Already, just a few years after the scheme began, there are nearly 50 boats operating again, though it's not herring now, but whitefish that they catch. Fishing is still a dangerous job, though not so bad as in the old days of sail. Then, in one single year, more than 100 fishermen from Scotland alone were drowned. Long ago, most island fishermen were only part-time sailors. They spent the rest of their time working ashore on their crofts. Nowadays they work full-time, and they might spend most of the week away from home, perhaps returning only midweek and for the weekend. Apart from anything else, it's a highly competitive business, and any time spent in port or steaming between fishing grounds is costly in time and fuel. The boats require to be at sea for at least 48 weeks of the year. Depending on the weather conditions and the size of the previous catches, the net might be trawled 3 or possibly 4 times in one day. As soon as the net's been dropped overboard again, the seamen start to gut the latest catch and sort the fish into different boxes according to size and type. And no matter how skillful the fishermen are, there's a big element of luck involved. There's absolutely no way of knowing beforehand whether the catch is a good or a bad one. With all its modern equipment, it's quite usual for a fishing boat to cost over £40,000 today. So it's not surprising that each boat spends as much time as possible at sea. Most boats from Stornoway land their catch on the mainland, so that the fish can reach the main markets more quickly. And they often spend the night there too, if it's near the fishing grounds. But once or twice during the week, they usually return to Stornoway for the night. And some land the catch there in time for the evening fish auction, which is held most evenings of the week on the quayside.
£2 a box, all of it £2. Anyways, with £2, £2, £2, £2, 4, £2, 4, £2, 6, £2, 6, £2, 8, £2, 10, £2, 12, £2.12, £2.14. £2.14 anyway, £2.16. £2.16, £2.16. £2.16. They all done at £2.16.
It's not so much the size of a catch that's important. What matters is how much the other fishermen have caught. The scarcer the fish, the more you're likely to get for it. So it's not always the big catch that wins.
£3.2, £3.4. £3.4, £3.6, £3.8. £3.8, £3.10. £3.10 anyway, £3.12. £3.40, £3.60. £3.60, £3.80. £3.80 squared up. Your own fish. £3.18. The order at £3.18.
Some of the fish is sold for processing in the local factory, and some goes to the local fish merchants or the fish and chip shops.
Beg your pardon? Well, I'm at £2.10.
But even with weaving and fishing and the other occupations, Lewis is still desperately short of jobs, despite the efforts of places like Lewis Castle College in Stornoway. In the islands, education is often called an export industry, and the college runs a training ship to fit boys for the merchant navy. Lewis has always had strong links with the service.
The steering wheel is now in the midship position. We know that because the map spoke and this pointer are at 0. This indicates the rudder is fore and aft. To alter course to the right or to starboard, the top of the wheel is taken to the right. To go to the left or port, top of the wheel is put to port. Now the art of steering is to steer the straightest possible course with the least possible effort. The black line in front of the compass there is the lubber line. That indicates the fore and aft line of the ship. But at sea, one must remember that when we are the helmsman, we get orders from the officer on watch, the master or the pilot. When he gives you an order, you repeat that order in a loud voice.
Next to weaving, the merchant service is just about the most important occupation for Lewismen. A heavy drain on the population of Lewis, since the seamen usually return only for leave. And so far at least, the college only caters for men. Girls who want further training usually have to leave the island altogether. Maybe some of them will return. But unless things change, it looks as though too many young people will continue to leave the islands for the mainland, or for a life at sea.
Stand by the pumps. All ready up. And start pumping.
Although Lewismen have always made their mark as seamen, the constant drain of youngsters away from the islands has the result of unbalancing the population there. Too many old people, too few young. And this is slowly wasting away their ancient Gaelic language and culture.